Welcome, everyone. Welcome to 50 Shades of Business. My name is Lynn Miller, and I am your host today. The show is brought to you by IntellectualRadio.com, and our sponsor is Scene Chicago and My Chocolate Soul. Today, we're going to be talking about storytelling. And for entrepreneurs, it's critical to be able to tell your story from a lot of different points of view. And one of the most important things that it's for is to attract the right customers. And today, we're going to be talking about storytelling from 3 points of view. So joining me today to my left is Jan Sugar, and she'll be talking about storytelling from the leader's point of view. And next to her left is Loretta Lofton. And Loretta is a longtime entrepreneur, and I think a serial entrepreneur, if I'm not mistaken. A little bit. And the queen of video storytelling. And I'm going to share the storytelling really in telling the story of how the entrepreneurs got to where they are, really. And then joining us shortly will be E.R. Spalding, and she will be sharing the perspective of storytelling from really the point of view of continuing the relationship with your customers and evolving the story about your relationships. So welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Excellent.
Hello.
We're going to start just a little bit by introducing yourselves to us and telling a little bit about how storytelling became really part of the fabric of what you do in your business.
Wow. Okay, so my name is Loretta Lofton, and I do run a full-service marketing and communications agency in Chicago called the L3 Agency, and we do a lot of content creation. We do a lot of digital work, and we also do a lot of message development and helping to shape stories for mid-sized companies who are trying to develop a story and be able to use that story so people can buy or support their campaign. So it's interesting because I believe that now the buzzword is storytelling. I started off as a reporter, and as a reporter, your number one job is to tell the facts. You are not to share stories. And so I quickly got out of it because I wanted to really talk about stories. I just didn't want to just share facts. And I decided to go into the PR world. And that's where I really learned how to serve as a spokesperson, to be able to create statements, public statements for companies, and making sure that the things that were published in the various media outlets was what they wanted. And I really loved being a spokesperson for top brands because I thought it was a unique way to talk about stories, because PR is about fluff. It's about fluff. So I wanted to do more of that, and then transitioned into marketing and advertising. And so really blending all of that. And I really have to tell you that storytelling and then the art of marketing is really a blend of math, science, and the arts. And really being able to tell the facts the scientific way, and then creating an art form behind it that would allow for your fans, your consumers, your customers, whoever you're talking to be able to connect with you in a very, I want to say it evokes a connection that is imminent, that is authentic, and memorable for people. So that's where I started, and literally I started 20 years ago, and then landed into the entrepreneur world about 18 years ago. And so I've worked for top brands, but probably the ones that I love the most is really when I get to shape entrepreneurs and shape their stories, and I get to really work with them. I think that's where I find complete inspiration, because I'm typically inspired by my clients, and I'm inspired by the stories and the things that they share. So that's how I've been able to pivot my company and make sure that these stories are being told and narratives are being shaped, because I believe that is the new way of growing. I do.
Great, thank you. And Jan?
I figured out late in life that I was a storyteller. And so I was an English major. We had to write a certain way when we were in college.
Yeah.
But I loved collecting stories. We love stories from the time we're children, we're little.
Yeah.
And everything else. And I loved stories. And I noticed time and time again, recently, a few years ago, I watched Downton Abbey. A lot of people watched Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
And I thought if I had seen Downton Abbey when I was younger, I would have known I liked history. Who knew? When I grew up, history books were dry as a bone.
Right.
And history was boring. Yeah. But Downton Abbey told stories
That's true.
about British history.
Yes. Yeah.
Accurately or inaccurately, it told stories. So over the years, I had a little business. I was a mom. I was a single mom raising kids, and I had a little business. And the little business was helping organizations tell their stories. It was fine, but what I was doing was learning how to be a better and better storyteller, helping organizations find their most interesting story, their voice, and then I pivoted to helping people tell their stories because lots of times the part of ourselves that we hide the most is really our most interesting story. That is true of leaders. Yeah. That is true of all of us. And all of us are stopped by something. All of us have a story with ourselves about why we won't tell our story. We're going to hide that part. But that part's the most interesting, the most accessible, and really often what connects you. Does that mean that it's always appropriate to share your whole story with everyone? No, it isn't. It isn't. But there's often a lot more that you can tell than you are telling.
I agree.
And so before we kind of get to a broader subject, so when you've worked with leaders in that way, Jan, what have they discovered? What have the people around them discovered about the leader? Because they've shared a little bit more.
Can I tell you a story?
Yes,
or two?
Yes.
Okay. So I recently worked with a woman who was a leader in manufacturing. This is unusual in manufacturing for a woman to be a leader, especially a woman in her 50s. She was a really, really experienced speaker. She had spoken about manufacturing all over the world. And she came to me because she had been invited by a business incubator, a Christian business incubator, to deliver a commencement speech.
Nice.
And she didn't want to talk the way she usually talked. She was really experienced. And she came to me and she told a certain kind of story. It had data. It was dry. And I heard, she was introverted and she was analytic. I heard this lively voice in her. And we developed a story that started with a Dr. Seuss quote. Oh, the places you'll go.
Oh, I love that book.
Because they were going places.
Yeah.
And this incubator had a Christian bent. And we wrote scripture into her speech. And what she wanted most was to be a Christian women's leader.
Nice.
And she was able to, she said, I'm so experienced. I'm old. I've never spoken like this in my life. I want to eat my words. They sing now. And she was able to go in front of this group. And she had scripture she loved and quotes that she loved, and her own soul was in that speech. And people cried during this. That's always a good thing.
Yes,
when people cried during your speech.
Absolutely.
People cried during her speech. She got a standing ovation. And she was afraid of alienating men because she was a little bit feminist in it.
Okay.
Because she wanted to be. That was her emerging voice.
Yeah.
And a man came up to her afterwards. This was very validating for her and said, "Was that a TED Talk? Did you just bring a TED Talk here?" And she was so complimented because she sort of brought herself from TED Talk to TED Talk, TED-like talk.
TED Talk to TED Talk. I really like that. It's quite a journey from TED Talk to TED Talk.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
I love that story.
Yeah. So can you tell us, Larvetta, just from the entrepreneur's point of view, when they're really trying to connect with a specific audience, and sometimes it doesn't happen right off the bat.
Absolutely.
It takes a little bit. And so even when you and I were talking about that, when you begin to craft their story, how does that work?
So it's a journey. And the number one thing that I tell clients is that you have to know that this is an instant gratification when you tell a story. It's how do I get them to engage, right? Then creating them to become fans, then creating them to become buyers. And that is a process. And most of your buyers appreciate when you've done some research. And most of your buyers appreciate when you ask them for their feedback. That is a two-way conversation. It is not one that is one way. We all love a reciprocal conversation, a give and a receive, not just, oh, I'm just gonna give all of this, but I'm not expecting to receive, or vice versa. And so I was just talking to a client today, and I was sharing with them, he's running for office for a particular affinity group. And he's just like, well, I want people to just jump. I said, no, there's a journey. We've got people to be able to engage with you, and then to be able to connect with you. And your story is how you're going to be able to connect with them. And what's that thing that's pressing that will allow for this audience to say that look, or like, wow, or interesting. Oh, and so that's the thing that makes them connect. And they were so concerned with their website. Like, they were just like, we've got to have the website ready. And while that's a very tactical thing to have done, what I really told them to do is really concentrate on getting them to come on this journey with you. And what I shared with her was that, just like, how when you were a child and there's someone that's actually reading the story, right, to you, and it's like 12 kids. Well, in the first 30 seconds, you're kind of like, why is this person reading the story to you, right? You're just like, why? Then what happens is that in the inflection of their voice, and they ask for you to participate. How many of you all have actually had that happen? And now it's almost like the storyteller became alive. Like, they're really talking to us. They're not talking at us. They're engaging with us. And so the kids all say, me too. That is experience. I've experienced that. And so then sometimes when you're doing that, what ends up also happening is that you get more kids that want to talk and you can't finish the story. That's what you want.
That's what you want.
That's what you want. And so getting them to understand that, and it's difficult sometimes when entrepreneurs who are leading big companies to actually shift. It is very difficult for them to do that. And he actually is a leader, and, but I said, but we're talking about the business and how to blend that personal in there. So it's very difficult for them, because for them, it was like, no, we don't have the website. That's all he kept saying was, we don't have the website, instead of really helping them to engage and connect. So that's one of the things that I say is both a challenge to communicate sometimes that with kids. I don't mean to call clients kids, but the process sometimes is like that, because you have to be patient. You have to take them and meet them where they are. And so that's where I've seen considerable growth, that people are so used to getting the instant gratification that to be able to really take the time to really delve into the story and really say, okay, but why did he do this? But why did he do this? But what's his origin behind from Chicago? Why did he choose this community? So really getting them to understand that. And again, I'm going to go back to the child, because I just believe that when we stay a student in our business, the rewards are just endless. And so as children, I hear this all the time. I don't have kids of my own, but I'm around a lot of kids when they say, why? But why? But why? So I was that child. But why? Help me understand. But why? Because I wanted to understand the entire story. I just didn't want to know, why isn't, Chips Ahoy not going to have chocolate chip morsels in their cookies anymore? And you just get that statement and you're like, but why? Why? Is it because it's no longer healthy? Whatever it is that they make that choice. But that's how companies have to be able to explain that why, and do it in a way that their fans and their followers and their buyers and their customers could appreciate.
It's so true. What Larvette is saying, the whole thing, you're saying journey, but again, you're going back to conversation. It is about creating story is about creating conversation with your clients, with your audiences, with your fans. if they know why with the Chips Ahoy,
Yes.
then they become part of the company. They
Correct.
become part of the conversation.
Yes.
It's always about conversation.
Yes.
When Matthew died in Downton Abbey, I was in grocery lines, and all the women were talking about it as if their child had died, because they were a part of everything. And so journey and conversation, story is about conversation.
It is.
And inviting people. You
It
make
is
such a good point.
Inviting people.
It's funny when you said being a student, because when we launched Growth Stage Tech, which was in November, we really launched it in July, but we launched it officially in November at a conference. I was urged to tell a story, which I don't like to do, because quite frankly, first of all, what I said last weekend was I am learning out loud with all of you. You're watching me learn right in front of you about how to run a company, about how to build a community, about how to host a radio show. You're learning with me. And so if I can be gracious about learning and making mistakes, then so can anybody else.
Absolutely.
So that's part of what I've done. But the reason that I started Growth Stage Tech, I was on a radio show this morning. I actually didn't tell the whole story. The whole story was because my father said, always be a student.
That's right.
And so I was, and I just kept asking a lot of questions. And then he said, always ask for help if you need it from the family. So we would have family conferences. And because the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. And that stuck with me. He's been gone 10 years and it never went away.
And I think the story that you tell right now has so much to do with leadership, because leaders need to ask for help from the people who are on their teams. And leaders need to be imperfect, because no one's really attracted to perfection. We really aren't. And on the other hand, there's this edge. There's this sort of really important edge, because they can't be exactly one of you because they're the leader. So they have to have some sort of regalness to stay a leader while being transparent. It's a tricky thing, but that's what leadership's about.
And I also think that we talk about authenticity and making sure that you are authentic. But I think you brought up a good point earlier, is that there's a place for it, though, because sometimes we can be authentic and it is offensive. And we have to recognize that. That actually happened to me. And I apologize, again, being a student, because I believe in being a student and I believe in acknowledging that I messed up, right? Because that also, to me, is a sign of a good leader. And I was under the impression, this person, for whatever reason, I said prayer. And they were offended, not in the sense of they were in a place where for them, prayer doesn't work. Okay? For whatever reason, it's not for me to figure out, but they were offended. And for the first time, I had never met anyone who would be offended by prayer, but I got it. And I respect the place that she was in, because what had happened was that she had lost a loved one who was an avid prayer, and she couldn't understand how could someone who prays all the time could suddenly just die. And for that moment, it was so emotional for me, because I was so sad, because I had said something that triggered her that was just, if you guys could see her, she was like, please don't ever bring that up again. And at that very moment, you're ready to say what you're supposed to say. And literally someone shifts the atmosphere of what you were about to share. And so we have to be careful with that. I think as lead, but I was so apologetic about it. And I really had to come down from being, at that moment, the leader. I had to come and just be the student for a second. Not the teacher. I had to be the student. Right. You
had to be a person.
I had to be a person and see humanity in that. That everything else didn't matter to me, that someone was hurting from something very colossal, and I just offended them.
And there's some real leadership lessons in your story. I love your story because, number one, you're a great student, and leaders need to be students.
Yeah.
I think we've all agreed about that.
Yes.
And so you were a really good student there. The other thing is conversation can get messy for leaders, for everyone. Difficult conversations are things that we all need to have. You walked into that blindly. You did not know there had been a death. You said something that was about your belief system. And I don't think necessarily the lesson is I have to be more careful, but the conversation can get messy. And it did in your case. And then you corrected course because you heard, wow, I just walked into something. This person's just had a tragedy. And you were able to get back on course. That's something leaders really need to know.
That's true. That's a good point. Because I was like, oh, do I have to, and I feel like I have to be so careful and not saying that. But to your point, it wasn't about that. I said it was really how did I respond to it?
Exactly.
From that, because the whole room actually shifted. And they did pour onto her and love on her and share, actually it created connection.
And I was just going to say, you know what? It may have looked like a mistake, but look what had happened as a result. She had the trigger was important.
It was important. And clearly, but you all have to understand that I was completely like, your foot was in your mouth.
You felt you had harmed someone.
I did. And I'm not laughing at it, but I'm just like, I did. Like, I literally was like, did I just put my foot in my mouth? Oh my gosh. And I meant no harm by it. But you're right. Some conversations are going to get messy.
They do.
It is what it is, right?
Absolutely. Because I had to actually kind of retrench myself because this company started off as Women in Growth Stage Tech. And I said, well, wait a second here. I want women included. I want to be an inclusive, diverse organization. And now I'm saying, if you can't, for not taking men, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So I changed it to Growth Stage Tech because it's as a community, we're going to support everybody getting what they want for their businesses. And so for me, I actually wrote recently, I said, everybody deserves a shot.
I agree.
And some people don't know how to get that.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to, and if you've kind of started by yourself and you're beginning to slow down or something's not going the way you were expecting, we're your next stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things I say for entrepreneurs, because I do believe
everybody gets stuck, right?
You're going to get stuck.
At every level.
At every level.
Every level of entrepreneurship.
And for us to be in Chicago, right? We're all in Chicago, at least today. And I'm from Chicago. And I remember, and I speak of the Cubs, Chicago Cubs, and how so many people went to the Cubs knowing that they were not going to go to the World Series. So many people thought they are my favorite baseball team. We know they're not going to make it. We know. And this went on for decades. And I had a grandmother who loved the Cubs and the Sox, and you couldn't tell her anything. But when I think about the Chicago Cubs is a classic example of everyone showed up to work. Everyone showed up to work to be able to deliver. Everybody. You didn't hear of people saying, well, you know what? Everybody's talking about it. You know what? I'm just going to bow out. I'm not going to be able to do this. And so as a result, for anyone that lives in Chicago, the Chicago Cubs is a classic example of staying in the game. And look at the reward that they now have a store downtown. It's so much more. And so having us as businesses, if you're stuck in that place, recognizing, but then all the stories came out from the Cubs. Like Harry, we really got to really understand why this baseball team was special to Chicago. And that's why these people were showing up every day or, throughout the year. And
diehard fans
and
believers.
And believers. Like they
without the evidence.
Oh, I'm just going to believe that. And so we need to be able to believe that without the evidence, right? And knowing that, to your point, you said, okay, I started off with, women, and then I kind of took that out because part of I think for us is that in marketing, we look at case studies, right? And case studies helps us determine research says X, so this is why this works, right? And every client is like, we have to pull the case studies on it. And we do that. but sometimes there's just no case studies on it. And the Cubs is a classic example. Nobody wants to be a loser for as long as they are. So that's not that's not a case study you're going to share. So even when we're talking about our businesses, when we have to keep at it and never stop believing in our businesses, but also believing in the stories, because you're going to keep adding to your story. That's the thing about storytelling. It's a journey, and it's a conversation that never stops. You should be adding every chance that you get to your story, because it is for a purpose in your business. And really understand that, because sometimes people say, well, that's kind of my story and that's it. And I'm always like, that's not it. You're still, as long as we are living on this earth, it's all about the dash, right? What are you doing in that dash, and telling that story is so important and significant.
We all have lots of stories.
Yes.
We all have so many stories.
Personal, professional.
They're all relevant. And what we don't say often is other people's stories that we've inherited, or that we've seen, that we've been part of, or we've been told.
Yes. Are really a part of
our stories.
Absolutely.
Too. We are the keepers of other people's stories.
That's
so when we're storytelling, it doesn't always have to be about our own stories. I was really curious this morning. I keep hearing about this Jen Sincero. You Are a Badass at Making Money. And she has a few other books.
Okay.
And I was interested in this because there are a lot of money mindset coaches out there now.
Yeah.
And they all kind of say the same thing. And so, but people were loving her. So I took a walk this morning. And in the Lake Michigan, it's quite beautiful today.
Nice.
Deep blue.
It is.
And I was listening to Jen Sincero to sort of analyze why she's so well liked. She's quirky. She tells stories about making money, and she brings in the first time she ever had squid. She brings in her father humiliating her. She brings in something about an amputee she met. And she's telling these stories, and she's convincing me about money mindset in a very granular, personal way. And if I can't relate to her about the amputee piece, well, I can about the humiliation piece and everything else. She's a great storyteller, and I think that's why she's really successful. I think that's why people like this book.
So, Jan, you talk with the leaders. I think I really appreciate Larvetta, the way that you've talked about stories evolving, and we're going to get back to that, because I really want to talk about how important it is to keep the story current. Like, it does not just a once and done. Scaling isn't a once and done, neither is storytelling. It's a process.
Fresher too. It's fresher for your customers.
Right. Absolutely. It's great for you. You have to keep it up to date. But what I'm interested in, just from the leadership perspective, is there's an issue about your voice. And sometimes it's really clearly needed with entrepreneurs, but it's equally needed with leaders and within organizations. So how, Jan, do you help the different groups and organizations get their story shared and told?
Well, it is about finding their voice. It is about finding their voices, people's voices. And so leaders can be in organizations, or leaders can be entrepreneurs. Leaders are all over the place. And so it is about finding people's voices. And people in general have lots of taboos, inner taboos, no matter how successful, a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of shame. Yeah. And there are all sorts of things we tell ourselves that we can't do because whatever. So somebody who's an unbelievable CEO and very successful might tell himself, he's going to be a man in my story, that he's not a good husband, or he's not a good father because he's too busy at work or something. And we all have these things that stop us, that we believe about ourselves. And I think leaders need to find their best voices. Introverted leaders think, oh, I'm kind of introverted. I'm not a good public figure. Then find your best introverted voice. Kathy, the manufacturing leader, is a very, very introverted woman. And she found this vibrant, quiet voice that totally landed with people. So I think it is about finding your voice. And a lot of times your voice is in the little stories. The little stories. When I work with people, I find sort of they believe that their story's here and forward and forward and forward. And then they say, oh, Jan, this funny thing happened to me. And sort of in that little off story, we start to find their voice. And a lot of times your best voice is in the stuff that you're afraid to talk about, or the stuff that's most vulnerable about you, or the stuff that's most quirky about you. I think we all have things that stop us, and we get at that stuff that is stopping us. And again, it's not immediate gratification like storytelling's not. It's a process of finding a really vibrant, powerful voice. And it's not always the voices that are shouting to be heard.
Yeah.
It's your voice. It's your voice. And you get more and more comfortable stepping into that. Does that answer your question?
It does, but it does. It totally does. And what comes to my mind is, okay, so what was the payoff for that? Like, so what was the result that people got? Because there is a payoff to starting to share like that. And you can't come from that intention. You have to come from the point of, I want you to really know who I am and why it matters to me that you are my customer. But so what's happened is there as far as that goes?
Well, two things come to mind. The first thing is that people deeply want to be seen. And for the people I work with, overwhelmingly, it happens that they just are so relieved at starting to get to the thing that feels more them, more interesting, more exciting, and they're getting seen in the process. And so that's the first payoff, that you just really we all want to be known and accepted.
Yes,
known
I agree.
and accepted.
Yeah.
So that's the first payoff, which is kind of internal.
I agree.
And the external payoff usually is that, and I can't think of a case where it hasn't been this way, that in your most comfortable, most you kind of voice, that people respond to you better, that your employees feel relieved, feel closer to you, feel like they know you, feel like they'll get on your team, feel like, oh, we get on the page with you. So there's a huge payoff in terms of how you connect with your teams, your people in your organization, and customers that you were talking about.
I agree.
That's the payoff.
Thank you.
I agree. That's the
payoff. So if we kind of move from the payoff of moving into that authentic story, and or let's say for the sake of discussion, more of the real story that people really want to know you for, how does it need to be added to or evolved as you're growing your business? If you're growing, for example, if you're growing from one division to multiple divisions or multiple countries, how does that shift the story?
Yeah. So, one of the things I'm going to talk just a little bit about, brands, right? And so everybody is now talking about a brand. You have to be a brand. I actually am opposed to that because I believe you have to have a reputation that stands for that brand. So if you've already made the reputation, it doesn't matter what you do. People will know that you have a reputation of being an excellent leader, have been an excellent financial advisor, or, excellent with money, whatever those characteristics are. I'm going to use Oprah because we just love her, right? But one of the things that I think that is unique about her is, and I believe we should all take a page in her book, was that she started off as a reporter, right? And then she went into having her own show. And then later, starting the magazine. Now she has a network. Now she has food. But when I really sit back and say to myself is, she's not a caterer. She's not a cook. She's not a writer, right? But she's doing all of these things that speak to that. But the number one thing she did was she built a reputation that people respected her as a storyteller, to bring important people, to be able for their voice to be heard. And so she's doing that in other areas, network, people who struggle with their weight. She's brought food so you can learn. So she's created solutions for the things that she suffers with. And that's the thing that makes you evolve, is how do you create solutions for the things that you suffer with to create that community for your business? And because some people's like, well, I got a brand here. And that drives me insane, because you don't have to have 50 brands. You can have one brand and they are extensions and solutions, and you become the leader to those solutions. And it's hard because some people, sometimes with entrepreneurs, it's like I'm all about the brand, and it actually just burns me up, because what ends up happening is that you didn't build a huge following. It wasn't like you built this following that if you go here, people are going to come. You're still building. So as long as you're still building, why do you shift into a place that's going to force you to work harder, in my opinion, and not smarter? And so that's part of the reason we're evolving, because as stories occur, how do I create a solution for that? How do I create a solution for my story so that I can help others? I can't be the only person that this has happened to me.
Exactly.
And so I think for brands, that's how we find a solution, right? And so when I think about, I was having a conversation yesterday about the new, how you can have food delivered to your home, right? And I was that person was like, I still need to touch and feel it. But I heard this amazing story of someone who is unable to go to the store because they are disabled. But they're smart, they work really hard, but they just can't do that. There is a solution to that, because there was a company that knew that there were people, and there were several people that couldn't get out of their house, not because they didn't want it, not because, that they didn't want to go to not because they didn't love to get out. It's just that they are physically unable to do that. And so how do we address that? Now, I'm sure there's a whole lot of people that can do that and choose to get their foods delivered. And that's fine too, because you're also creating a solution of convenience and allowing for people to do that. And that's the thing that as businesses shape, we're so busy. The word is, we deliver the results. We deliver excellence. And I'm always like, that's everybody. Oh, we're the best one for the job. Okay, that all sounds great, but I hear it in all industries. But the story is, I am the solution for that busy mom who is unable to get to the grocery store because there's 4 kids that have to get to 4 different after school programs. So I'm providing a solution for her. So when she walks into her home, she has groceries in front of her door, and she can get right down to cooking. So realizing that that's the story, but that's probably your story. That's why you built it, is because of that. And that's the solution behind it.
But it's really the customer story. So what you're really focused on, and I'm glad you kind of brought it up, because it can't be emphasized enough that knowing who your customer is, like how they behave, what they do in the morning, what they deal with, you have to be able to articulate it, or you could tell all the stories in the world and it won't speak to them.
It's that two-way. It's that conversation. It's that conversation. You can't, and brands to me are good for this. We know our customer. Did you ask them? No, we really haven't. So how do you know your customer? Because as long as your business is evolving, your customers are evolving. So their needs are changing. So how are you responding to that? So I always tell customers, like, when they don't respond to bad reviews, that gets under my skin. So whenever I purchase something and I see that there's a bad review and the brand doesn't respond, I don't buy from them. Because what that's telling me is that you don't care that someone else isn't fond of your business and you haven't responded to them. And we could say they're busy, right? We could say that. But I always use the example of when you're in a hospital and you have a loved one and they haven't seen you, you want that doctor to come there and just say, everything's going to be okay. Doesn't matter, they're not about to do anything, but you want that doctor to say something. And so customers want that brand to say something and respond to their story of what just happened. And so it is so important of that two-way conversation, which is why when we're on the phone and nobody says anything on it, are you still there? Because you want that two-way conversation. You're not just talking, you're wanting to have that two-way conversation and being able to engage with that person. And engagement only occurs when there are two people able to share their stories.
And that's what Oprah did so well.
Yes.
She had that two-way conversation, and
Yes.
she was about transparency.
Yes.
She talked about being poor.
Oh,
a lot of
yes.
people started out
Yes.
poor.
That's right.
She talked about racism.
Yes.
A lot of people dealt
Yes.
with that.
Yes.
She talked about being
Women.
overweight.
Yes. Being
That
a
was
woman.
That was everybody.
Absolutely.
What's the percentage?
Everybody.
It deals with their weight and everything else. And
Yes.
she could keep evolving those brands because she was always in conversation with her constituency. She was
Yes.
always in conversation.
Yes.
And so she kept on being able to add the food, and she added the network, and she added the movie stars, and she added the regular people,
Yes.
and she added the people who were fighting with
Yes.
each other, because she kept on listening to her customers. She was every woman.
She was, and I think she's a classic person of someone who believed in having that two-way conversation of understanding who her customers and providing solutions for her customers. She knew, I remember when she used to do the book club. And so it was providing a way for women to connect and read and share about that book. And I know I had a book club as a result of it, and got books of me. And so but she also stayed a student because she kept us engaged in staying a student, because obviously the more you learn, the more you earn. And so when we have the opportunity to read more and engage more, it allows for us, to me, build up our ability of our IQ, right? An intellectual quotient, in the sense of people can go to school and get a Harvard degree, obviously. But I think there are some people that read a book every day and probably are just as intelligent as someone who went to Harvard or Yale.
And she was so good at dealing with mistakes publicly.
Oh my God.
She fasted and lost all that weight and wheeled that fat out in the
she
wheelbarrow, and that didn't stick. That
Right.
wasn't the solution.
Right.
She took women on a journey with that one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if we kind of look at if we bring this back to entrepreneurs who are really moving from one stage of growth to the next.
Okay.
They are really, they're on a new journey, or they have to create a new story. Mm-hmm. What are some lessons you've learned personally about telling stories that you would have, I always ask entrepreneurs, hindsight 2020, what did you realize you shouldn't have done that you wouldn't do the same now?
Oh gosh.
But when it comes to telling stories, when they look at their stories, what is it that they really can, move to the side, and what can they really focus on when they're thinking about those stories?
I think, even though I think being a student is imperative, as we've all been talking about, I also think action is imperative. And sometimes we study too long, and we're so afraid of publicly making a mistake or not being good enough or imperfection, that I think if I had something to do differently, I would have acted more and thought less. I'm really good at thinking. And
thank you. That was I think that's great advice for them. They want to make it perfect before they.
Ooh, and that drives me crazy.
It just doesn't work.
And we aren't able to iterate. We really, really need to iterate, and we can't iterate if we're not acting.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing. And I think that sometimes we get in the beginning, like when I was sort of iterating this business from the organizational storytelling to what it is now, I've sort of been a mom for all these years, and I've been a single mom. I kind of have to hide that from everyone because people won't take me seriously. And I wish I hadn't. I was learning a lot.
Yeah.
I was learning a lot in those years. I was CEO of a small organization at home. And I was facing lots and lots of challenges as a single mother, as a divorced person. And I was actually not writing the stories that I wanted to write, but I was writing stories and learning my thing. And I wasn't telling people because I thought I wouldn't be taken seriously. Now I tell everyone. And so I think that we can be more transparent, but we're afraid. We're afraid we won't be accepted. Nobody wants to be kicked out of the tribe.
Yes.
It's a deathly fear for people of,
Yep.
You're out of the tribe.
It's interesting to hear your story. And so it's funny because we exchanged a few words earlier today, and I think it's just priceless just how things evolve as a result of that. So for me, I didn't like that I had worked for myself and I was single. So while you said you didn't like being a single mom, I didn't like being single. Never been married, didn't have kids. And so I hated that label. And I hated it because it seems like I hadn't like I can hear stories of married and kids and people have got these great businesses. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't have this, this, and this, and they've got a great business. Okay, but I only got one of that three. And so I struggled with that within myself and forced myself, and I'm going to say forced myself to marry because I wanted validation as a business owner, because I thought being married would mean that I would get into places I've never been to. I would not get into the tribes.
So you had a story. You had a whole story.
I had a whole, and so I thought being married would get me into a tribe that I never could be in a tribe, because you've got to be married to get in that tribe.
Did you ever hear the thing about your backstage? You're comparing your backstage mess, we all have messy,
yeah,
to their highlights reel.
Wow.
And so
that's
really funny.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah, it was their highlights reel, the perfect marriage, which we often
Nobody
see
has.
fall apart. We often see.
But you knew that you couldn't get into the tribe without being married. What's it about,
that,
right?
Yes. You knew.
Yes. I thought that I didn't care about perfection. I just cared, can I get the card to get in?
You wanted the Harvard degree.
That's interesting, getting the card to get in, because now when you think about entrepreneurs, they kind of feel like maybe there's a card to get into that world too. And I begin every meeting by saying, wherever you are in your journey is perfect.
Absolutely.
And it's because there is no one way to be an entrepreneur. Right. There is no one kind of entrepreneur. They all happen at different spaces and different places. And so if there's any advice that you could provide for them, what would you provide for our next stage entrepreneurs about their stories?
One thing that pops out is follow your quirk.
Oh, yeah.
So if there's sort of a template for growth, there's a template for early stage, there's a template for growth, and just part of you says, there's something kind of burning here. Mm-hmm. I mean, take business advice, be a learner, take everything and take criticism and everything else, and then consider that there's something burning in you and you really feel like it's the right way to go. Those companies are the interesting companies.
I agree.
That followed some kind of drive and some kind of pulse that they knew meant something. They didn't know exactly what it meant, but they knew to do that. So I'd say one thing is follow your quirk.
I would certainly say follow your instinct, but the other around your quirk. But the other thing that I am learning, and I could say as a lesson, is don't be so serious.
Have some fun.
Have some fun in your business. And I think I can speak for someone who was a little serious. And so I am a woman of action. So I always went for action. I'm not a person that it's got to be perfect. I go in and out, but for the most part, I'm a woman of action because I know that I want to push something out. But I can almost be too serious with that level of action. It's not perfection, but the action behind it has to be right. And so have fun with it and let people see the fun side of you, not the serious side of you all the time. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to, it's okay to share lipstick colors, right? It's okay.
Lipstick sisters now.
Who knows that was going to be the first thing they did.
Exactly. And it's okay. And we're still leaders. It's okay that we are able to do that. So that's one of the things and that's to me what makes women use their femininity in a way that shows leadership. And it doesn't have to seem like, your femininity is not in place. That's the thing that women have that men don't have.
This is a behind the scenes because this is what we did before this show, having never met each other. And I think of one of my important business relationships. We were at a seminar. We both went into the ladies' room. We were both in front of our mirrors. And I said, I love your hair. And she said, I love your lipstick. And we became business associates. This is how women do business. And you didn't ask about women, but.
Yes.
No, we didn't. But it is done in a conversation. And so I really think that that's the final lesson, is that if you think you have to have all the answers, that's what's going to slow you down.
That's a good point.
And the minute I gave up having all the answers and said, it's time for me to bring in a team to make the difference, everything started shifting.
And what about just having the faith that
right.
you'll figure it out as you go along?
Yeah, we're going to figure it out together. So
I can figure this out.
Yeah,
I don't know how,
right,
but I can figure this out.
Yep.
Right. So on that note, I just want to thank Larvetta Lofton for joining me, E.R. Spalding, and we missed you, and we'll have you on a different show, and Jan Sugar for joining me. This has been really a lot of fun to talk about storytelling. Thank you for tuning in to 50 Shades of Business, brought to you by IntellectualRadio.com.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn.